Hi everybody, this is Lisa from Supportive Tarot, and this is my first sort of real video here on this channel. My first video was a VR of sorts, and I just wanted to jump in now and tell you more about me and who I am and why I'm here and what I hope to share with you and all that good stuff. So I thought I'd start with my sort of tarot origin story. So many years ago, I would say we're at like 22-ish, maybe 23 or a little more. I was surrounded by an amazing community of people who were really into tarot and divination. A group that I was very lucky to be a part of at the time. We had created quite a community together. We had public circles at the Sabbats together. We had a little choir. We got together and pulled cards from the tarot. But when I first, oh hi, this is my little dog Bruno. He's just gonna hang out with me now. When I first started to play with tarot, it was as a querent. I better show you his face. Look at that face. Okay. I was as a querent, so I would ask questions of friends who had more tarot experience, and I would just kind of be hanging around, enjoying all the good sharing. The very first time I had a really powerful intuitive tarot experience was when a friend of mine read my cards with the Voyager Tarot, which is a deck that still I'm not overly fond of when I look at it. It's a little busy, but the way that she read had a significant impact on the way that I viewed the tarot. So before that experience, I had seen tarot as something that I had a hard time wrapping my brain around. I wanted to understand logically how it worked, and because I couldn't, I struggled a little bit. But when my friend Michelle gave me a reading, it felt very, very real. And when I tried to connect what she said with the cards in front of me, I couldn't always. And yet it felt true. It felt very spot on. And I think that's when I started to look at the tarot as something a little more complicated than a system that I could look at logically. It wasn't long after that that I picked up my first deck, but I wanted to prove to myself that tarot worked, even like intuitively. And I knew that I have the kind of brain that if I had picked up a deck and a book and studied the meanings, I would have simply memorized and held myself to structure and to rules, because this is something that I have a habit of doing in my life. So I went to a local shop and I picked up, I'll pull it out for you. I picked up the Osho Zen Tarot. And I think I was drawn to this because of the images. They were very bold. Let's see if I can get the glare off of these. I've actually trimmed this deck. Let's see if I can get it closer so that there's less glare. I've actually trimmed this deck, which gave it new life, but this is obviously a deck I've had for now over 20 years. So it was quite worn at the edges by the time I finally trimmed it. And I also edged it in black. But when I picked this deck up, I read through the book that came with it, and I really enjoyed the stories for the images, and it really helped to connect me with the meanings. But I also didn't want to rely on the book as a crutch. I didn't want to pull a card and then feel like I needed to look it up to verify what I got out of it when I was reading. So what I did is, after I read through the book the first time, I threw it away. And I'm probably going to get all kinds of like shock and awe responses to that, but I literally threw it away. I could have like donated or something. No, I just needed to get it gone, and I got it gone. And I was like 19 years old at the time, so I mean, there's that. But I got rid of it, and I started reading with this deck. And I read exclusively with this deck for a very, very long time. I was not at all drawn to the traditional Rider-Waite imagery. I wasn't drawn to the colors, the artwork. Nothing about it felt like something I could connect with. But these cards, I felt them. And I've always had a bit of an attraction or affection for Eastern philosophy, for yoga, for Buddhism, Taoism. And so a lot of these stories associated with these cards, they really spoke to me. But I would also say that I could see and understand what this deck's bias was from the very beginning. So in this deck, there's 4 suits. There's an earth suit, an air suit, a water suit, and a fire suit, just like with the traditional tarot. And I would say that those suits line up pretty nicely with, and the cards within line up pretty nicely meaning-wise most of the time with the traditional tarot. But the air suit, the one that we would normally associate with the Suit of Swords, I love this card. It has sort of a negative slant, and I knew, because I knew a little bit about Eastern philosophy, and that we are, within Eastern philosophy, we hear a lot about the mind getting in the way. And so I feel like I saw that bias a little bit in the artwork and in the stories. And so I was able to be aware of it and neutralize with the way that I read. So I didn't always read the air suit as negative. And that gave me a very different view of the Suit of Swords later when I started to learn the traditional tarot. I learned that while the artwork may depict a really difficult situation in the swords or in the Suit of Air, that it's not always the case. Sometimes there's a really beautiful thing happening that we're learning from or growing from. And I know I'm talking about this deck a lot, but this deck really formed the way that I view the tarot. And later, when I would begin, actually I'll get talking about that in a second here, but I really, this had such an impact on me, and it's still sort of my home deck. Like if I just need to pull out a reading and get a clear message and not, if I don't want to think outside the box, if that makes any sense, if I want the familiar or the comfort of the familiar, this is the deck I reach for. It's kind of like my chicken soup deck. It's like the comforting deck, because I know these cards so well. But what I did is that because I'd thrown away the book, this deck forced me to rely on my intuition. When I would pull a card for myself or for somebody else, I would go with my gut and talk about the part of the story that I remembered from the card that seemed the most meaningful in that moment, or the thing that that card made me think of in that moment, even if it didn't match the book. And today, I would say that probably some of my intuitive hits off of this deck don't even really line up with the book entirely. I've never really reacquired the book, though I wanted to. I have acquired the app for my smartphone so that I can reread the stories now that I have a firm sort of understanding of the deck from my own perspective. But this was definitely the beginning of my tarot journey, and I started to have really powerful experiences reading for people with this deck and reading for myself with this deck. And it also has a very, I think, a very heavy, not heavy, but a strong psychological bend or slant to it. And I really like that. I feel like it works really well with psychological questions, with, yeah, just with all things. Yeah, I just love this deck so much. Mine was quite worn and chipped at the edges. So when I started seeing people modifying decks, this was like one of the first ones I really, really wanted to modify. So I trimmed all the borders off except the bottoms here and edged them in black, and I love it. And I used kind of a thick marker so that it created a bit of a, I don't know if you can see it, a bit of a black border. Let's see if I got a better one. Yeah, here we go. God, I love this. This is like literally, I think of this image every time I pull the Two of Cups, no matter which deck I am using. But you can see the black kind of went around the fronts a little, and I love how that bordered them a little tiny bit. Anyway, deck mods is another video. So this was the first deck I worked with, and I worked with it for a long time. You can see behind me, actually, that way, you can see my decks hanging, many of them hanging there. So I have quite a few more now. But I was still really, really resistant to the traditional Rider-Waite. But after a time, I wanted to learn more. I wanted to expand beyond the Osho Zen, and I wanted to start to get familiar with the more traditional take on the tarot. And I stumbled onto an app called Legacy of the Divine, and it was featuring Cyril Marchetti's art. And that was the first deck that to me felt like a Rider-Waite classical sort of deck, because it was more, it was non-Osho Zen. That was the first one that was not Osho Zen that I really was like, yeah, I want to get to know that deck. And so when I eventually found a print copy, I picked that one up as well. And Cyril Marchetti's artwork, I really hate the glare here. Cyril Marchetti's artwork is so good. And again, it's very vivid, and you can tell my aesthetic is, I really like bold colors. I really struggled when I transitioned from Osho Zen and suddenly had the court to deal with. I was like, what the heck? That was really hard for me for a time. But I really, this Legacy of the Divine, it's not a Rider-Waite clone in the sense that the images are done in a new way. I love this Eight of Cups. Oh, I love this. But this was the first deck that, I guess this is kind of, I just realized I'm kind of making a, almost like that touchstone deck video. I might have to like throw that hashtag in because I'm kind of doing that. These are the decks that formed how I interact with the tarot. But anyway, this one is still probably one of my very favorite classic feeling decks. To be honest though, I've really grown and expanded, and probably, you can see my other dog in the background, that's Shayla. She's having a little nap in the back. This deck, I feel like you really get the emotions. I love that Three of Swords. Isn't that incredible? Oh, so much emotion. I sort of find that other than this deck, I tend to stray away from these almost photorealistic or these almost seem like computer generated. I don't actually know how they're made, but these really almost three-dimensional realistic images, I find that I stray away from these in most of my other decks. I really like other types of artwork, but I'm totally watching the screen because I love seeing these images come up. I'm getting lost in doing this. I should probably wrap it, but yeah, so anyways, oh, look at that Hangman. But yeah, this one really, this was sort of my bridge deck. This was the deck that got me away from just the Osho Zen into a place where I could branch out a little bit. And it's really, really beautiful. And I still really enjoy reading for others with this deck. If I'm reading in a public place where I want a classic deck to work with, this is sort of the one that I work with. I find that clients really connect with it well. It doesn't have, it just does a beautiful job of the difficult cards. I love this deck. So this was Legacy of the Divine by Cyril Marchetti, and I believe Barbara Moore wrote the guidebook or helped write the guidebook that goes along with this deck, and that's also quite good. The next thing I'm going to show you isn't really tarot at all, but it's also, I've had this deck, or decks, almost as long as I've had the Osho Zen, and these were another experiment in intuitive reading, and these are massive. These are the Soul cards. It's actually Soul Cards 1 and Soul Cards 2 mixed. You can see there's slightly different colored backings to the decks. There's like a darker blue and a slightly lighter blue. I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, I don't know if it shows up well, but I mixed these two together, and these were the decks. This was the really outside my box experiment. Again, I was still trying to prove to myself in the early stages that tarot was, see if I can hold it over here easier with less glare. This was my experiment, again, with confirming to myself that tarot worked, that that my intuition was real. It wasn't just something I was superimposing on the situation. I was reading a lot for friends. That one's upside down. There's going to be a lot upside down because I shuffle this all willy-nilly. I was reading a lot for people I knew well, and so I didn't entirely trust my intuition and myself to know, am I getting something because I know this person well, or am I actually listening to my intuition? And this one was really good for that. But what I learned almost immediately when I started using this deck, I would just pull cards and I would just say the first thing that came to mind. This deck taught me a lot about being responsible as a tarot reader, because I learned very quickly that this card, or sorry, this deck, or these decks, they got deep and personal and intense really quickly. These are by Deborah Kaufman, I believe is her name, and the form of artwork is called touch art. It's very tactile, and so a lot of the images are very, they're very soul-inspired or spirit-inspired. I found that whenever I would pull this deck out for people that I knew, that I would get really strong intuitive hits about really intense private things. It was reading with this deck that taught me that if somebody wants a reading, that I always tell them that sometimes really private and personal stuff comes up. They may want to be, if they've got somebody with them, I usually encourage them to ask the other person to step away, because sometimes stuff gets revealed that people aren't expecting, and it's very private. It's kind of, it's just something that I want people to be prepared for. But I learned that because I would read with this deck, and again, really private, personal stuff would come up. And it really solidified my belief in divination as a system, because I learned that I learned things about people that I knew really well that I never knew. There was a time when I read for my older sister with this deck, and it really just it frightened her, I think, a little bit, how it went into stuff that I have no reason to know, and it had an impact on me as well. And I put these cards away actually for a long time after that, because it was a really intense experience learning something about my sister that I had no way to know, and talking about it in the reading. Now what I do with this deck most of the time is, if people want to do, if they want to dive into deep shadow work, if I want to dive into deep shadow work, or look at childhood trauma, I do that a lot with this deck for myself, looking at really deep soul stuff. This is what I reach for. But what I mostly reach for this deck for is for past life readings, which again is something that I never ever in a million years thought I would feel ethical doing. I wasn't sure that was even a thing people could do, that you could actually look into that. But as I experimented with this one, I started to find that I had really powerful experiences, and that they were very meaningful and felt very, very true. And I think the thing that sort of validates my experience with this deck from a past life reading perspective is that I get a lot of consistency for reading for the same person again and again, where we start to see themes from life to life, which is pretty cool. But the way that I read with these, I've never actually pulled these out into a spread, ever. And I find these readings, when I pull these out, to be very long. What I'll do is I'll pull a few cards and lay them out in front of me and see if I see any connection between them. It's kind of hard to describe. I'll pull a few and I'll go, yeah, I think this one goes with that one, and this one goes with that one, and I'll start to see a story unfold in front of me. And I'll be quiet for a long time. It's almost, I think it's unnerving for people who have gotten readings from me, because I'm very quiet for a bit as I sort of soak it all in. And I start to see the stories developing, and usually there's a few different chains that sort of develop all at once. And then I start talking through them, and then it just flows after that. I just pull card after card until it feels done. And it's why I find this particular kind of reading to be really energy exhaustive, I guess. I don't know how to say it. They use a lot. It uses a lot. It takes a lot out of me. So I don't do them very often, but they're very powerful. And this artwork is incredible. I'm probably just going to show you the full deck if you let me. I keep saying that, and I keep doing it. But this deck gave me, it really taught me to trust my intuition. It really taught me to listen to those intuitive hits, because I have never done a reading that way where somebody said, no, you're totally off base. And so it really gave me the confidence to read in a more intuitive way. And I think without this deck and the Osho Zen, without the guidebook, I don't think I would have had the belief in my intuition that I do today, and the ability to sort of listen to myself and listen to the first thing that pops out of me when I do a reading. So that deck has been really important to me. Most recently, the deck that has really had an impact on me is the Marielle. And I'm sure you've seen this elsewhere, but I'm still going to show it because I love it so much. I might show it over here. This might be easier. Let's see if I can figure this out. It's mirrored for me, my image. It's throwing me a little bit. There's a lot of gloss. Let's see if I can get away from the glare. I trimmed this deck also after watching other people doing the same, and I edged it in black, and it makes it not at all unwieldy. What I really couldn't handle about this deck when I brought it home was that the border on one side was thicker than the other, and it was making me so twitchy I couldn't even handle it. But the artwork is stunning, and I've done what other people have done here and used a silver Sharpie. I think some people have used gold, just to mark the number of the card and the suit, the elemental symbol, so that I know which is which. But this deck, holy cow, I think this is the first deck I've picked up in the last 20 years that has made me really, has really challenged my preconceived ideas about the cards, that has drawn me in. This artwork is so powerful, and it did not appeal to me aesthetically at all at first, but it was so potent I just couldn't avoid it. And once the guidebook that goes with this, I'm sure you've heard this elsewhere, but the guidebook that comes with this is incredible. Some of it gets almost a little too, I don't know what the right word is, almost a little too, it goes in so many different directions. Sometimes I get a little lost, but there's always something really powerful to pull out of it. I look at this card so many different ways. It's like I see a figure, but then I see just mountains. I love how this challenges my perception. And a lot of these cards I find really difficult to look at, particularly as some of you may be already familiar with. The Hierophant in this deck is really, there it is. This was really tough for me, and I think that's part of the reason why I got this deck, because this card gave me some feelings. This card represents some stuff from my own life that's really challenging and is ever present, and I just, it made me feel things. And I think that's one of the things that's really amazing about tarot and about working with artwork in this intentional way, is that we find that it makes us feel things. I love this. This is such a, this card is so comforting for me to look at. Just the way that the figures in the card are being protected and ushered forward and guided it's so nurturing. This is so powerful too. I love this. I mean, I love this card too. This King of Cups makes me so happy. He's so comfortable floating on the surface of his emotions. So relaxed. King of Cups is one of those characters that I just adore in almost every deck, but it's so pretty. And I could literally talk to you guys apparently about this deck forever, but the reason I wanted to show it is because while it's much more recent for me, it really had an impact. So those would probably be, I guess, my touchstone decks. I'm going to throw that in there. Why not? Those have basically been my touchstone decks, but they've formulated or formed my tarot journey over time. And I have a lot of decks. I have decks that I pull for different reasons, but those are the ones that have really been formative. So as far as my channel, so I've just babbled to you about my decks for a while. As far as my channel, I'm going to just play. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to do some tarot tags maybe as they come up, and share some of my favorite decks for different purposes. I really do want to make a video about my playful decks. I've got a whole bunch of stuff I want to share. I'm probably going to do some lives and some readings and things here, because I really like how I've done live streaming on my yoga channel before, and I really like how lives let me get out of my way, out of my own way, and out of my head a little bit and just connect with people. I really enjoy that, but I'm brand new here, so I'm not sure anybody would even know if I went live at this stage. So for now, I'm just going to share content and engage a little bit with you all and see what comes up. If you have something you really want to see, if you love looking at deck collections, I would love that, because it's like show and tell. You guys are all there. I can show and tell. So if you want to see all my decks, all my oracles, all my tarot, all my Lenormand, which I know I say wrong, I'm working on it. If you want to see my stuff, I'd love to do that. If you want to see decks that I pull for a particular purpose, I would love, love, love for anybody who's watching to comment below with what you want to see, so that I can cater my content to who's actually kind of vibing with the way that I put myself out there on YouTube. So if you think you're going to stick around, definitely post below what you think you want to see. Give me some ideas. I've got lots and lots in my head that I want to get out. But we'll just see how it goes, and we'll go from there. If you love lives, let me know. If you love deck walkthroughs, let me know. I'm happy to do walkthroughs whether they exist out in YouTube or not, because I think everybody has a different perspective. I think sometimes the older decks don't get seen as much. There's not as many walkthroughs of those, so I've got some of those. Happy to share all that stuff. So let me know what you want to do. Definitely subscribe if you want to stick around and get notified when I have new videos. I think there's a bell or something you can click, and then you know when I've done something new. But mostly I'm just looking forward to engaging and sharing stuff with you guys. So have a really great day or evening wherever you are in the world, and I will see you again soon. Bye!